If you play Magic, you've almost definitely heard of Commander. I say almost definitely because there technically could be someone out there who plays Magic yet is unaware of Commander, but you have to ask yourself, why does that very idea seem sinister? Why does it seem like that person has something to hide? And is there any hope for them? The answer, of course, is no. They're doomed. But for the rest of us, we have Commander, and Commander literally would not exist as we know it today without today's guest. He was present for the creation of the format, then known as Elder Dragon Highlander, and is personally responsible for bringing it to the masses through his stints as a Magic Pro Tour judge. It was also during these tours that he met the people who would eventually form the Commander's Rules Committee, whose sole purpose is to maintain a healthy state of the game. And yes, this includes the occasional use of Banhammer. But truthfully, focusing on banhammers is missing the point. And with that said, it is my great pleasure to introduce the man, the myth, the legend himself, Sheldon Menery.
Well, thank you for taking time to talk to me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, I know you don't like me to go into the origin stories, but I do find it interesting that you discovered magic when you were in the Air Force.
Yeah, I was in the Air Force from 1984 to 2004, and Magic came out in '93. I was actually at Gen Con in 1993 when Magic came out.
And that's a long career. And what was it that you did specifically?
I was in computers and communications, which was a pretty broad field that shaped over the course of my 20 years. When I went in, it was just computers. And like my first job was working on a mainframe computer system that was the size of a circuit city, and paper tape, punch cards, high impact printers, disk drives that were the size of washing machines, that whole thing. And then the career field morphed over time to include communications as well. And then, it basically today is the IT profession career field. So I did everything from work in a tactical communications van to doing computer security for Dick Cheney when he was Secretary of Defense.
That's pretty high level stuff right there.
I did some stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So then when was the because I guess, I mean, it's sort of like a very interesting career change. You go from being in the Air Force to then Magic, I would imagine taking over at least the bulk of what I would, your professional life. When did you make that decision? What was the moment where you were like, okay, I got to do this?
So when I retired from the Air Force in 2004, my wife asked me what I wanted to do, and my wife, who is an actual rocket scientist, by the way.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So she said, "What do you want to do?" And I'm like, "Well, the local cable company is going to pay me a lot of money." And she's like, "No, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Write books and play games." And she said, "Well, that's what you're going to do then."
Really? And so,
Yeah.
um, so then you just decided, but then, so by then had you've been actively judging, you had been a power
Yeah.
five or a level 5 judge, which
Yeah.
explain to the layman what a level 5 means.
Well, a level 5 judge, we don't have level 4s and level 5s anymore, but level 5 judges were the leaders of the program that sort of shaped the narrative of how we implemented the sort of DCI vision of what the judge program would be. And of course, we also were the head judges of the Pro Tours. So we served, there was a dual-hatted role, both sort of on the leadership and on the tactical and doing the Pro Tours and stuff.
I would imagine, thinking back on it now, I'd imagine your time spent in the Air Force probably it assisted you with being a judge in a sense that you're very calm. You have to be very logical about things, and you can't let your emotions get involved. Is that a fair statement to make?
Yeah, I mean, let's see, I certified as a judge in '96. So I was already 35 years old and an Air Force veteran. So I didn't need the leadership education that a lot of younger judges will need when they come into the program, right? I hit the ground running,
Right.
as knowing my way around administration, leadership, management, people. You don't lead people by one leadership style. You lead them based on their capabilities and experience. And that's pretty good. That was a pretty good lesson for the judge program, because you had some people that came in sort of as rules experts. We we used to have a name for rules gurus back in the day, but for as
What did
rules
you call
experts,
them?
or people that just wanted to serve their communities and really needed to be educated in how to do that. So yeah, there was a big part of what gets involved in the judge training program that I could sort of clep out of, because I had already been doing it for a decade in the Air Force.
See, okay. So then what's interesting, I guess, is that then, obviously, as we all well know, the rules committee comes about. Now, I have a lot of questions about that, obviously, but one of the ones I would like to think that I'm curious about is that it seems like the rules committee is something that is inherently important to the game of Commander. Have you guys thought about the legacy of it? How maybe in 20, 30 years, who would be the next people to move in? Is that something that the advisory committee is brought in on? How are you guys going to treat the legacy of the rules committee?
Yeah, legacy shopping is certainly something that has become very important to me in the last couple of years. I mean, I'm not young. I just turned 60, so in 20 or 30 years, there's some chance that I'm not going to be around to actually do this. And I'm a big believer that you shop for your legacy in the, not how you're going to be remembered, but how the thing that you've left is going to get managed. How your legacy is shaped is something that I think you do while you're on top, not while you're on the decline. When you're I think you do it at the height of your powers, not when your star's on the wane, as it were. So I think the real thing is that what we have to do is cultivate that next generation of leadership. Is the Commander Rules Committee has worked as successfully as it has since its inception, because we had already worked together beforehand. Scott Larrabee and I did our first event together in 1999. So there's this 15-year legacy of the Rules Committee having worked well together on a thing previously, and then started doing this other thing together. So there's a level of communication, there's a level of trust, there's a sort of a level of anticipation of each other that we have, that we have to think very, very seriously about when we bring the next person or people on, because our model for success, it probably isn't going to be the model for success for the next people, the next people along. Diversity is a super important thing to me here, right? But the current rules committee is for privileged straight white dudes. Right? Gavin is the youngest of us, in his mid 40s, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a demographic that we have locked up already that we don't need anymore, right? I don't need another one of us. We want diverse thought processes and demographically diverse people. Like, not for nothing. I just tweeted this last night as an excerpt from next week's article on Star City. And it was just the sentence, and not for nothing, representation matters.
Right, I did see that.
And it really, really does. So, we started, the idea was to start that representational aspect with the Commander Advisory Group, which is definitely socially, ethnically, culturally, um, gender-based, just everything diverse intentionally. Also diverse play styles, but everybody has to have the same sort of end goal in mind, which is, of course, to make Commander the best format that it can be on its own terms.
I see.
So to wrap back around to the answer to the question is there's a lot of thought, especially from me, sort of as the senior member, thinking about how tomorrow will play out. And there are some great minds in Magic, and there's some great personalities in the Commander community, both from the CAG and not. You know, we made sure that we had everybody understand that the CAG is not necessarily a stepping stone to the RC, but at the same time, it'd be kind of dumb of us to appoint the smartest advisors and then ignore them if we were trying to fill the top leadership role. So
it's
everything is on the table.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I said everything is on the table here. But yeah, I mean, we want people who really are both invested in Commander, love it, and understand Commander's own ecosystem and its place in the greater Magic ecosphere.
It's an interesting philosophy that you take, and I do appreciate it. And I also like the fact that looking over at the rules committee, there's for me, I only started playing myself in 2019, so I'm pretty new. And to see that you have people that are on the rules committee that started, say, in only 2017, it's refreshing, because you sort of get the idea when you first hear of it that, oh, I need to have been playing since alpha. I need to have an encyclopedic, knowledge of the game, but it doesn't seem like that's necessarily the case.
Well, yeah, for the Commander Advisory Group, it's not, right. We want a spread of both diversity of style and of experience, right? Because because fresh eyes sometimes really can enlighten you in how to solve a problem. You've been staring at a thing. I know this as a writer, both as a sort of a feature writer and a scholarly writer, that sometimes you're too deep in a thing and you can't see a different way out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I've stared at a page or a couple of paragraphs that I've written about Henry V or whatever, and it makes perfect sense to me, but somebody else looking at it doesn't have the same thoughts in their head that I do. So they're like, okay, I'm starting to understand what you're saying, but you need to tell me more. And sometimes it's the same way with fresh eyes on Commander problems. So the original round of CAG appointments was intentionally done for outreach. They were all content creators and relatively well-known personalities in Magic, to both enable the rules committee, which sort of had an ivory tower kind of reputation,
Right.
To get our message out and to get input from the player base back into us. Because we had, at a certain point, certainly when the CAG idea came up, we were traveling to fewer events. I wasn't traveling at all, and there were fewer. The Pro Tour and the GP system had undergone a change, so Gavin and Toby and Scott weren't traveling as much. And for the early lifetime of Commander, there was a secret agenda to go into the Pro Tour and GPs, and that was to talk to the player base of the format while we weren't doing the other work. So we were traveling less, and I think we were able to listen to fewer people, and listening to people in person is way better than through them online. So the idea of again of outreach and input in the first round of CAG appointments was intentional. People that had big social media followings, or Josh having the command zone, and the even Ron Foster, who I always call the most important person in Magic whose name you've never heard. Ron Foster brought Japan into the Magic market,
That's
almost
significant.
single-handedly, in fact. And Ron is a super casual commander player, so it was great having his attitude. Unfortunately, he had to leave the CAG because of a job commitment, but we want and we've obviously doubled the size of the CAG in the last nearly 3 years, with, again, great minds, great personalities, but we want to kind of move away from the content creator, because, again, we have them already. Like, I don't just need another online personality.
Right.
Emily Rice, who Monday is starting a job in Commander Design, or in casual play design. That was It's a Coast, was a late appointment, and she and I were talking one day, and she was talking about her friend Brian, and her friend Brian loves Commander, plays Commander. They play together. They play with a couple of other friends, but Brian is not plugged into nearly anything. Brian doesn't read Commander content, doesn't follow the rules committee page or whatever. And she said, but she talks to Brian, and he has a lot of great thoughts and ideas about shaping the format. And right then and there, I said, we all need to find our Brians. Like, all 4 of us on the RC, and all 14 on the CAG we need to find our Brians. We need to find our friend who plays but isn't so heavily invested that, again, they've seen it all already. I don't want anybody to sort of regurgitate a poll to me. I can read a poll as well as Shivam can, right? I don't need Shivam to tell me what the internet is thinking. I need Shivam to digest what his fan base is thinking, and then give it to me through his Shivam colored lens. Right. Those people are there for their minds, not just for their ability to reach out.
Well, that makes sense too, because with I'd imagine the complexities of dealing with social media coming into the world of Magic, and now all of a sudden there are these, people who are, either, voicing their opinions loudly, some of them toxic, some of them not so toxic, but in any case, it's a whole onslaught of voices. You do want to balance that out with people who are not going to be part of that onslaught. That seems logical.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that you have to make sure you understand. Especially when you're a sort of a representative for the audience of something. Never read the comments, right? I did an AMA, Reddit AMA a couple years ago, and somebody said, what was the best lesson you've learned about being a Magic personality, and how did you learn it? And I said, well, the lesson is, don't ever read the comments, and I learned it by reading the comments. Right. So I think the big message there is don't drink your own Kool-Aid. So when you read the comments and they're glowing praise, don't think that that makes you something super special. And then when you read the toxic stuff, of course, don't take it personally, because really toxic stuff spewed out online is never about the target. It's always about the source. So as soon as you realize that stuff's not about you, it's relatively easy to let go.
Agreed. There is a lot of to me, it seems like it's just, whenever people are doing that, there is obviously, that's an unhappy person that is trying to release it in a way that is just not healthy. But
right.
but we don't, not to focus on that, because I do understand that people have issues, and it's toxicity. I don't like it, but I understand it existing. But in any case, to bring the thing back to like, sort of like what you're all about, like let's say I'm completely new to Commander and I hear rule zero. What if you could give me the simplest like beginner like description of what rule zero is? What would it be?
Rule zero or a pregame discussion is about setting the expectations of the kind of game that you want to play. We all have a limited amount of leisure time. And I don't ever want anybody spending their leisure time miserable. So it's about what kind of game we want to play. And it's not like that we invented Rule Zero, right? It's been around games for as long as there have been games.
Really?
Well, sure. I mean, playing touch football is a Rule Zero discussion, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
We're not going to have any tackling in this game. Or whatever it is for however you, if you're playing slow pitch softball versus fast pitch softball when you're getting together with a few friends, that's kind of a Rule Zero discussion, right? You've taken, there's one set of rules for the game, and then you're taking what you want to get out of the game and adding or subtracting to that. It's not about Rule Zero. It's not about somebody enforcing their will on somebody else. It's about getting together, and the essence of a pregame discussion is about everybody who is going to play setting at least the environment for which they have the best chance to enjoy themselves.
Right. Okay. So like let's say the only, I guess the tricky part for when I was starting out, the notion of rule zero was very confusing for me, because when you're starting out playing Commander, you don't really even really know what style you even want to play. So what would you suggest would be a good way to maybe what would be the best way to learn Commander if you could, just do it from scratch? Like, would it be to watch games or?
Yeah, I think over the history of the format, more people have gotten into the format by having it taught to them by a friend or or their local game group than just seeing it online somewhere and deciding to pick it up. Excuse me. So I think that you're going to get that. The habit is that you're going to get some small education in the format, what the format is like and about, from the person or people who teach you in the first place. But really the one of the issues is that there are some people, like you say, who are beginners who really don't know what the conversation is about in order to have it, or there are people who have a tough time having that conversation regardless of their experience.
Right.
We're not all as socially capable as each other, right? There are people with social anxiety disorders or just kind of shy, and you don't want to sort of force them into an uncomfortable situation in saying, well, you have to lead this Rule Zero conversation, when the thought of leading a conversation is incredibly stress inducing to them. Right. We don't want to do that either. So it's really about reinforcing this message that this format is about playing together, not playing against anybody, right? I think in a Commander game, you play with people, and yes. And I think that's the biggest attitude that I would love for as many players to bring to the games that they play and suggest and pick up at the game shop or wherever they are. That when we sit down to a Commander game, unlike all other formats, we're in this thing together. Even if there are oppositional elements to the game, to the little picture game, right? There's four of us. We're trying to reduce each other's life totals. But there's oppositional elements. But I think in the frame around that is that we're all in it together. And ideally for me, the ideal commander game is everybody does something, maybe some epic stuff happens, and then kind of parenthetically somebody wins. Right? I don't care who wins. The winning in a commander game is when all four players go, that was fun, let's play another one.
Yes.
That's the win.
For example, I had an experience where I played a Thief of Blood and I stole the entire board's counters, right? And I'd had this, 500 floating vampire. And then somebody killed it with an incredible spell, but I wasn't mad because I got a chance to actually just steal those counters for a hot minute. It's about getting that splash in.
Yeah, more people should play Thief of Blood, by the way.
I love that card. I really do. So
and Ether Snap. Play your Ether Snaps, folks.
It's actually, speaking of vampires, I read in an interview that you said, or it was that, or a Twitter comment, you said that you used to get a lot of eye rolls for you used to give eye rolls to the vampires, but now with the Innistrad Crimson Vow, you're raising your eyebrow. What do you mean? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So both as a Commander and Magic fan and as a designer, I was like, vampires are so overdone. Like, I get it. Like, I get that it's one of the most popular tribes out there, right? But we've just done it so many times, and I'm like, oh, vampires again. And there were some play design choices to make a few creatures in Strixhaven into vampires, and I was like, they didn't really need to be vampires, but okay. But yeah, I was to say that I've been jaded about vampires for a couple of years now in Magic is not an overstatement. And vampires. Okay, we're going back to Innistrad. Great. We're gonna get a whole vampire set. Great, whatever. And then I saw the cards for Crimson Vow, and I'm like, oh man, all bets are off. Like a year from now, I might start rolling my eyes at vampires again. But for right now, I'm super jazzed to play with Olivia, Edgar, their friends and enemies, and all the wedding guests.
It is some crazy there. I feel like the general consensus, at least from what I've been gathering, is that usually there's a lot of people bitching and moaning, for lack of a better word, but this time around I feel like there's a general excitement for this, which is refreshing, because I haven't seen that a lot in my short time being involved with Magic since 2019.
Well, you came into Magic in the era of product overload.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, there are a lot of veterans that are like, oh, we're getting too many sets too often, and I can't collect everything, especially now that there are 9 artistic versions of some cards or whatever. So it's really easy to not be able to get excited about a set because you're still digesting the previous one or maybe the previous 2 before that, right? Midnight Hunt was 7 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And we're already on Crimson Vow. And I was sort of bracing for impact, the sort of ennui wall of another set coming at me. And Crimson Vow really took me by some level of surprise. Man, I'd already seen a bunch of the cards too. So I guess it just kind of passed. It was looking, we on the RC get to see some of the cards in advance and comment during design and development so that there are theoretically fewer problems along the way. But I think I was looking at those with a designer's eye and not as a fan. And when when I read the full Crimson Vow list in the last week or so, the fan in me kicked in, and the person that was going to get excited about playing the cards took over.
Interesting. What do you think, if you were to describe the difference between a design and a fan eye, what would be some examples of that?
Well, when you're designing a card, you're looking at how much fun, at least for me, I'm looking at how much fun are the people who are playing this card going to have with it. And as a fan, I'm looking at it from the angle of how much fun am I going to bring to the table when I'm playing this card.
I see.
So it's one is about trying to make the fun from an earlier stage, and the other is trying to make the fun from what you have now. Like as a designer, you have a opportunity to change the piece itself. No, that doesn't really need trample, or well, what would happen if this created, this made, um, corn cob counters or whatever. Uh, but once you have the card as a fan, you can't change any of it. It's got flying and trample, and that's what it's got. So you have to work with it from a different direction.
Well, you give me a breakdown of what it was like working on a set, because you were brought in on a set. Tell the story about how that came to be.
So it was SCG Con in June of 2019. And they brought me in as a guest, and they brought my very dear friend Gavin Verhey in as a guest. And we went to, I don't remember if it was a lunch or we just went off to talk. But we both had a break from spell slinging and talking to the players and stuff. And we just sat and talked about what was coming down the pike for Commander product, about what we had in mind for the future of the format. And at some point during the conversation, uh, we talked about me coming out and doing some Commander design. And like I said, I think that was June, mid to late June of 2019. And by September, I had signed the contract, and on the 1st of November, I was out there for 2 months.
And what was that like? Was that, I mean, that has to have been very fulfilling to have been in that position.
It was the best work experience of my life.
Yeah.
I think the culture that they have. I can't speak broadly for Wizards of the Coast, because I was only in Studio X. I can't talk about what working in IT there is like, or what working in customer service is like. But in Studio X, the culture was amazing. You realize that you're surrounded by a bunch of creative, skilled, and dedicated people, and they're all there for you, and you're there for them, right? I used to call these meerkat conversations. So you're in this giant cube farm. The floor that Studio X is on is circular, and the magic designers probably have, it's about 1/3 magic designers, 1/3 D&D, and 1/3 sort of magic video and editing and art. And they're the low-rise cubicle walls, and they're in groups of 4, 8, 12. So it's like three pods in a column, and you just conversation would start, and somebody's head would pop over. Somebody from the next aisle over would pop over, and Ethan Fleischer and I, who sat next to each other, would start talking about something on Commander, and Chris Mooney, who was like on the other side of the wall from Ethan, head would pop up and he would start to talk, and then Arnier was a couple cubes up, and we just get this back and forth from not just from the people that were on our team, but from the people who were sort of in Studio X and in Magic Design, and even like from over the wall, Mons Johnson working on, or Charlie Caccino working on just completely other products would stand up and throw their 2 cents into the conversation that we would have. And creatively, it just opened so many doors for you, because you weren't locked in. I have to make this card alone, right? you got, hey, what do you think about, like, I would just get up and walk to the rest of the, like my pod of um uh, uh former rules manager. Eli Schiffman was behind me. Jules Robbins, Eric Lauer, and Dave Humphreys were in my pods. So
Wow.
two giant magic minds, right? And I just, like, okay, I have an idea, and again, I was working on Strixhaven, and I really wanted to make a card called Class Pet, where, like they do the experiment in high school where the kids have to carry the eggs around for a
Right.
week.
Yeah.
I wanted to make that into a magic card
Oh, yeah.
where there was a benefit. There was a benefit for keeping it alive, but then you had to hand it off at the end of the turn. And if you broke it, something bad would happen to you. And
Oh,
I
fun.
swear, I tried a dozen designs, and it's like, it's just, sometimes nothing resonates. Like, it doesn't work right in the scope of the set, or the scope of even the idea that you're trying to work out. But again, it was just this great environment where I could turn around and talk to a lot of people, um, and culturally, there was, Aaron Forsyth is a vice president, but Aaron Forsyth is still a Magic fan,
Mhm.
right? And a Commander fan. So, Aaron Forsyth would drive by my desk, or Mark Rosewater would drive by my desk, and we would just talk. We talked about Magic, and the investment of everybody in the hobby, and um, in the sort of into the real intellectual property of Magic, was something that I really hadn't expected. Like, there was 10,000-foot view thought coming from nearly every designer, right? Nobody was locked in to just the one thing that they were doing. They were looking. You have to look at the thing when you're designing. You have to look at the things that you're doing in light of other things. Like, maybe anybody can make a magic card in a vacuum. Making a magic card that fits a set design theme, that also has that's also maybe in an environment with a couple of sets before it and a couple of sets after it.
Right.
You have to really grasp. Again, I used the word ecospheres earlier. You have to really grab the ecospheres that the card or cards that you're designing have to live in.
Mhm, mhm. It's I mean, and it makes sense. I think maybe people have a conception because it's connected with Hasbro, that there's sort of this idea that, oh, there has to be one or two people there that are just corporate, but it honestly sounds like the people there really like live and breathe the game, and I think that's
Yeah,
why it's so popular.
yeah. I mean, again, I was there 2 months, not 20 years, but there was never a we have to make we have to make the kind of card that will sell booster packs attitude from anybody in design. And I certainly never got that from any of the many levels of management that I interacted with.
Do you think that, what would you say would be one of the biggest misconceptions about you and or the rules committee? What would those be?
That we ban things because we lose to them.
That's
Uh,
interesting.
I'm when I mean, that's such a worn trope at this point. We don't even respond to it when somebody says it. Um,
Mhm.
but honestly, we're more likely to ban things that we've won with. I frequently tell the story of building a Leovold deck, playing it here at the house with my regular group of friends, and we were in the middle of the first game that I played with it, and I was on the phone with the other people on the RC saying we need to ban this card.
Wow.
Like, like with the like, I had Leovold, and I played the Teferi's puzzle box, and I looked at it on the table, and I looked at it going around the table, and really, I picked up my phone. I picked up
Wow.
my phone, and I dialed Scott right away. It's like, Leovold is going to be a problem, and yeah, it didn't last much longer after that.
It's insane. That actually ties into another question I was going to ask. What are some of the cards that you, when you saw them, you immediately were like, nope, nope, not going to work, and then it ended up coming to fruition?
Grizzlebrand for sure. Like
Mm-hmm.
and the cycles ran a little, the sort of banning cycles ran a little differently back then. We weren't on the kind of regular schedule that we're on now. And we knew that we were going to let Grizzlebrand into the wild for the 2.5 weeks or whatever until the next announcement date. But there was just no way that card was going to do good things for the format. So
Mm-hmm.
it other than obviously Luchri kind of getting pretty banned,
Yeah.
I think that was the one that existed in the wild for the least amount of time.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's like we knew. So and we talked to some people. You go to the LGS and like, hey, why don't you build a Grizzlebrand deck and see how busted it can be? Or hey, why don't you throw a Grizzlebrand in your 99 and see how? And yeah, from the outset, we knew that one was getting banned right away.
Has there been a card that you initially believed that it was going to be a huge problem, that maybe it did not end up being something that was
Well,
so severe?
experience has taught us that to never panic. Like, with every set, people will look at the previews and there will be a card that they throw their arms up about and like, oh my God, this is going to ruin Commander. Right? Whether it was Jeweled Lotus or any of a number, just like pick a card from every setback
Mhm.
since you've been playing. There's been one of them, and they kind of turned out to be nothing burgers. So, like, so yeah, experience has taught us to just give things some time. Uh, we had a pretty strong inkling about Hullbreacher,
Mm.
but wanted to see how it would play out. Um, and if Hullbreacher had sort of just stayed in the that small percentage of the highest powered decks, you never know. If Hullbreacher, there were a lot of ifs with Hullbreacher, right? But it definitely seeped down into the games of a large portion of the target demographic, which is when we knew we wanted to take action on it. But yeah, I mean, Tergrid is another example of a card where, like, I
Yeah,
saw it and I kind of clenched up a little bit. I'm like, oh, this is going to be icky. And COVID happened, and that's definitely not a card that is suited to webcam play very well,
exactly. Yeah, that's true.
right? So we really have been waiting to see what happens with in-person play finally coming back, and over the next cycle through the end of the year into January, we'll probably be taking a good look at what happens at the LGS and in places where people are playing in person. And if it turns out that it's like people play Tergrid once and go, ooh, I don't want to do this anymore, and they take it apart, great. Um, we probably won't need to take action if it's starting to, if it shows evidence of just like ruining the environment at the LGS level, then we'll have to seriously think about it.
Yeah, Tergrid, I played against it once, and I hate to be the dark naysayer, but it isn't fun to just like lose everything, and you're like,
Yeah,
why are you taking my planes from me? You can't even cast white.
right. Yeah, I just recently I built an old Stick Fingers deck, and I was missing a card or two from the list that I drew up, and like Star City didn't have it, or the LGS didn't have it, and I'm like, man, and I'm like, you know what? It's black. I'm just gonna jam Turgid in here with no support. So like nothing that makes people sacrifice anything, nothing that makes people discard anything, just as it is, and see how that it plays into the deck. I've only played the deck once. I had Turgid in the graveyard, and it wasn't the best thing that I could reanimate. So I don't know what that tells you, right?
Yeah.
It's one very small data point, but otherwise, we'll see.
What do you think the best, and when I say best and worst, I don't mean maybe, like one is really good or one, like in a sense that one's awesome and the other one sucks, but like as far as precons go, what would you say is example of one that you loved and one that you thought was just not right?
Clearly, the best precon ever, beyond the shadow of a doubt, by the laws of names and nations, is the Silver Quill one from Strixhaven.
And why do you believe that? I'm curious to know your thoughts on that, like the breakdown.
Person who designed it was a genius.
Interesting. Yes.
It really captures the essence of what I think a good commander. I think all this the Strixhaven precons did this. I would just really like hit the right notes in what makes great commander games. Both interaction and again, sort of interaction and agency are the things that you want everybody to have in a commander game. Again, everybody does stuff. Eventually, somebody wins. And the play design team, Jules Robbins' play design team, took the deck that I handed them and just really went to town, honing it and fixing it and thinking. Jules even told me, he said, like when we were working on this in play design, we were thinking about not just the fact that you had designed the deck, but thought about you playing the deck. And we wanted to bring that ethos that you bring to the table out of the deck, and they certainly captured that. The whole sort of design philosophy of the precons has shifted, and they're kind of playable right out of the box now. In any sort of target demographic game, you can crack them open and play them. The cycling one with Gabby Ness Warden, right? Somebody played that out of the box in a sort of mid power kind of spicy power game, and they ruled the roost for the game. I was like, okay, they've done a good job without making them broken, right? There's no Silver Quill or Midnight Hunt or Adventures in the Forgotten Realms deck that you just vomit cards onto the table and win, right? You have to play the deck, and that's really what I would rather my brain win the game than my cards. Yes. So, right, it's not an indictment of any other play style when I say that. Like, if people want to tier 4 win con and win the game and that makes them happy, great, right? That's them enjoying the game in their way. But consulting for Thassa's Oracle leaves me cold. And and if I won 1,000 games in a row with it would leave me colder and colder. I want to be able to evaluate a board state, press the button at the correct time, use the pieces on the board in sort of judo fashion to use players' powers against them or whatever, and just and win off of the board state as opposed to off of my library.
I've only recently found out about you did this to yourself deck, which is such a brilliant idea. The notion that you created an entire deck that sort of like gives people a spanking for doing broken stuff. How did you, what was the inspiration? Did you, maybe were you against some sort of overpowered deck and you thought, I need to stop this? I mean, what brought that discovery for you to make the deck?
It wasn't it it wasn't so much that, but it was back in the days when I lived a little closer and had the time and went to Armada games a couple of times a week to play Commander. And my very close friend Todd Palmer worked there at the time, and he was behind the register, and it was kind of quiet in the shop. And he's like, "Hey, have you seen this card?" And I looked at it, and it was Paraelectric Feedback, and it deals damage to somebody equal to the CMC of the spell on the stack. And the habit in the shop at the time was kind of ramp into exsanguinate to win a game.
Oh.
And I'm like, man, Paraelectric Feedback would be kind of cool. So then I just like, what other cards like that? What other sort of Boros Reckoners and Mog Maniac kind of cards were there in Commander? I had already been playing Mirror Strike for quite a while. You gotta love somebody swinging with Blightsteel. It's like getting Blightsteel out on turn 4 and swinging with it, and then playing the Mirror Strike. So yeah, it was not a very far leap to just put that whole deck together. And then the Jeskai were the colors. It was even before we called things Jeskai, I think. But the red, white, and blue were the colors, and Light Minefield and Power Stone Minefield were pretty big operatives. Like, if you want to attack, it's going to hurt your creatures. So and then Ether Flash came in, and then the deck just sort of fell together as I looked at the kind of cards that did those kind of things. Did the Deflecting Palm, reflect damage kind of things. And I think it got its first big trial by fire in a game at Gen Con, probably 2012 or 2013. And we were playing, there were 5 of us, and we were playing star format. So we had 2 allies, 2 enemies, right? So in star, the 2 players sitting next to you, your allies. 2 players sitting across from you are your enemies, and you win when your 2 enemies are eliminated. But of course, one of your enemies is allies with one of your allies, right? So it can get very political, and people saving each other and whatnot. And the game featured Eric Klug, the artist, the author artist, Brian David Marshall, David Williams, and I think Stibbs. It was either Adam Staborski. Well, because he was there, he and Klug had traveled to Gen Con together, so it was probably Stibbs. But I remember Patrick Jarrett was there, and we had a crowd, and Klug, who was my ally, was playing Heartless Hitsugu as his commander, and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be ugly. And we got to a situation where he's like, and he was sitting to my right. He's like, I'm gonna activate it. I'm like, Eric, don't do it. He's like, I'm doing it. So he activated it, and I played Reflect Damage, which did 100 damage to him instead. And now I have a Reflect Damage altered by Eric Klug, and the picture on it is Heartless Hitsugu.
That's great. That's amazing. I mean, it's a brilliant idea, because I can't tell you how many times, like, I've tried to do the group hug thing. I've tried to do the political thing, but you'll just get people who just can't seem to not do the really fast game.
Right.
I mean, like, and they're not even necessarily being mean about it. They can't control themselves. Like, we've had discussions where I'm like, okay, play it slow just so I can get this out. And they're like, not a problem. I'll play it slow. And then they don't. And they're like, I'm sorry. And that's such a great, I'm absolutely going to build it. I'm so.
Well, I think one of the big things is that it scales, right? You can play it in a low power game, or you can play it in a high power game that doesn't necessarily, like, you can't play it in the fastest Oracle games because it really doesn't do anything. But in most of the bands, it scales to who you're playing with, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're going to crater hoof and swing at you, Ink Shield does one thing, or Comeuppance does one thing. If they're hitting you 4 at a time, the cards are going to do something different. So I think it can play in games across a very broad power spectrum. And I mean, one of the downsides of the deck is if you're not trying to do something really busted, I can't do it.
Right.
Well, I guess you're gonna eventually kill me with a bunch of 2/2s.
Right, you're just gonna punch me in the face over and over again, but I'll just be like,
eight at a time. What am I gonna do? Right.
That's great.
So I think that's one of the strengths is it can sort of it can drink with any tinker in his own language.
And I know that I don't have you for much longer, so I will keep it short. But a couple of questions. Well, first of all, though, there's all the cards behind you. What is that I'm seeing that's directly behind?
Oh, this is an uncut sheet of foil commanders from the first commander set.
Oh wow! Is it like the big commander ones? The
oversized cards? Yeah, it's the oversized cards.
I miss those. I'm not gonna lie. I miss them, Sheldon. I miss the
oversized cards. I actually think I like the new heavy duty ones better.
But I just love the big ones. I just miss them. But I'm not gonna lie. The heavy duty ones are pretty cool. It's and they are like sturdy, but part of me likes the flash of the big ones, I guess.
Yeah. So this was a gift. This was a gift from Studio X on my last day, and it's basically signed by everybody in design and around the company at Wizards of the Coast.
That's nice. And I meant to get to this earlier, but I think it's just a good question, and it may not be the best finisher, but oh, what the hell. Now, the sort of the way that I'd imagine it goes down when you do decide that something is going to be banned, like for instance, Golos, I think people were under the impression that this was some sort of like unfair thing, that it gave everybody time. And it seems the way from what I'm gathering that these decisions are very much a journey. And when you make a decision like that, how far ahead do you guys do you plan out when something like that happens that's going to be big?
We have certainly been talking about Golos since the beginning of the year, or maybe longer. There are times when it's time after enough evidence, like we talked earlier about not panicking too fast. I would imagine, unless a card is just obviously super miserable, we're probably going to wait at least 2 cycles after something comes out to take action on it. Doesn't mean we're going to not think about it for 6 months. It means that we're going to sort of watch and see if the sky actually is falling, or it's another, again, jeweled lotus that ends up not doing what people think it's going to do. So there's a minimum time where we want to take a look at it. Again, from the get-go, Hullbreacher was like, and Hullbreacher was a card that changed late in design, by the way.
I see.
And like when we saw the final set, like after it was time, I was like, do you remember Hullbreacher being like that? Or whatever the card name was before. Like, do you remember that card doing that? And when we were all like, I don't think so.
Right, we would have noticed that, I think.
Maybe we would probably notice. So, so we want to make sure Commander is a very big ship, and
Yeah.
you don't turn it on a dime, right? And messaging is very important. You know, people are going like, why don't you do test bans and see how things play out in the meta? And the first answer to that is there is no global Commander metagame.
Correct. Yes. True.
Right? There's no one metagame, so that just doesn't work at all. We have to take a look at how it's playing across the disparate pieces of the format, about the environments, the high-powered environments, the low-powered environments, the sort of, again, target demographic environments. So it's a ship that we want to turn very slowly. So we would rather wait a cycle extra to take action than do it a cycle too early, and be wrong. Like we really want to think and watch and gather as much evidence as we can. And people are like, "What data are you working off of?" Well, we're not working off the kind of data that you think that when people say, you know, you should use data. Well, we don't use that kind of data because we don't have the capability to gather it, and I'm not really sure what we would actually do with it. Right? That again, they want us to use the kind of data that competitive formats or tournament formats use, and that's not part of our rubric. Right? Competitive balance is spelled out in the philosophy document that we're not interested in competitive balance.
Right.
We want to create a resonant experience. We want Commander players to have fun. Commander is for fun is the first sentence of the philosophy document.
Agreed.
So
Yes.
so we're gonna move in that direction. And if things are unbalanced but fun, then that's fine with us. So we take our time and we really think about the kind of things we're going to do. And we want, there are like 1,400 legendary creatures in Magic now, and we want all of them to have a chance. And we believe, based on what we observed and our experience, right? There's 100 years of Magic experience on the RC.
Wow. That's impressive.
We use our experience, and like, we think that Golos is pushing out a bunch of those other choices because how many times do you see in a discussion, well, I'm thinking about playing this commander, and the answer would be, oh, just run Golos.
Right. True.
And you can run Golos as a 2-color deck, as a 3-color deck, as a 4-color deck, as a 5-color deck, as a mono-color deck. Doesn't matter, right? It's just, oftentimes it was just the best choice, and that pushes out creativity. And we really want this format to be about creativity. We want the Dune themed decks to have their day in the sun, right? We want somebody is building, I'm sure somebody's building a Twilight sparkly vampire deck.
I mean,
right.
I don't want to, admit to it, but yeah.
So we really felt that as though Golos was actively pushing those things out. One day on stream, Toby just grabbed Golos, played it at the helm of his Omnath deck, and he said, this is a better commander than Omnath for a deck that I built around Omnath.
That says something, because if you can just like fart it in there and then all of a sudden it's doing its thing. I mean, Golos was always one of those things where I just was like, I'm not even going to touch it because I don't like the way it, like you said, the cards, you don't, there's not a lot of thinking. It's just, it does things for you. And
yeah, it pays its own part of its own commander tax.
Correct. Yeah.
And then I'm always, whenever I see a card that casts things without paying their mana cost, the warning signs go, the the low-level klaxons go off right away. I'm like, oh, what's going to happen here? Like, what's the okay? If the ability is super expensive, maybe, or if it can only happen once because you X off a card or whatever. But casting stuff for free has generally been problematic throughout the history of Magic. So, so that's one thing we keep an eye on. So Golos just again, Golos casting stuff for free and then making it cheaper to cast stuff for free and
Yeah.
making it easier to cast stuff for free. It's just like it was this narrow funnel into which things were going, and we really wanted to expand out.
It made sense to me when it happened. I was like, I'm with them on that one. Well, I have one final question before I let you go, but I wanted to say just a side note, fellow USF Master's Program graduate. So there you go. Go Bulls.
What was your?
I got my English, my master's in English education.
Oh, cool. So we were in the same department.
No, but you did your thesis on Clockwork Orange, huh?
Clockwork Orange was one half of it. Yeah, Clockwork Orange and Henry V.
Interesting.
Well, constructions of masculinity was the overarching theme.
That's really interesting. That's really cool.
The Henry V work was about how he doesn't just kick the French out of his country, kicks them out of his language. So it started as actually a linguistics paper that morphed into part of the master's package. And Clockwork Orange was sort of pretty classically about constructions of masculinity, leaned heavily on Laura Mulvey and the camera eye and how we construct, how we look at things. So I know there aren't in the 21st century, there aren't a lot of scholarly works done on Clockwork Orange anymore. So I was happy to be able to do it.
I mean, I come from that world, so I'm like, and when I was like the Association for Fantastic and the Arts, like you see that kind of stuff happen. It's like, it's a great thesis, like book and and the movie too, but the book more.
Yeah.
So, it's just it's good stuff. So I definitely can nerd out on that stuff with you. I guess in connection to that, do you think that there would be? I feel like it could be an interesting thing, but seeing maybe some sort of book about the creation of Commander coming down the pike. It seems like that would be an interesting thing to consider.
Yeah. I mean, Benny Smith did a book some years ago called The Complete Commander that was pretty decent that I wrote the forward for. Maybe that's the next work that I have in me, right? I'm looking at I'm thinking about the fact, again, as going back to sort of what we talked about early on about legacies. It's like, okay, well, I've done this thing and I've done those things. So what's the next thing for me? And I think it's important, especially as you get older, that you think about the next thing, right? There was a time, I'm thinking about the fact that there was a time when 60 was old. Like when I was a kid, a person who was 60 was old.
Yeah, like ancient
old. And you look at TV shows from the 60s or the 70s, and somebody who was in their 50s just was pretty wrinkled and gray.
Right. They looked 70.
Yeah. And in the 21st century, man, you never know, right?
Right.
With one or two exceptions, I'm relatively strong and healthy. So the sky's the limit, and I don't ever want to be that person who rests on their laurels. I want to find the next thing that I do. So, maybe finally somebody really writing the complete history of Commander is the right call. And turns out a couple of English degrees may give me the skill set to do that.
I feel like it's something worth considering because when I read that you got the backing for it, and who else better to, at the very least, you would be an excellent editor of it if you didn't necessarily want to do the bulk of the writing, but you could also do that. And I think that it's important, like we were discussing, for you to sort of and it isn't a matter of self-glorification. It's just, for me, somebody, when I started playing Magic, I wanted to learn about the history of it. So to have the history of it from the person who was there, it just makes for better reading and better knowledge.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff in the middle years that we really have to cobble together from memory. Like I remember Gavin sending me the email and saying, "Hey, we should probably form a formal body for EDH," and doing that. I mean, like I hard remember doing that. Some of the decisions we made in the early days, uh, a vague memory. We're talking 15 or more years ago now. So uh, there's a bunch of stuff that may have been foundational that we didn't consider so at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So there would be a lot. There would be a lot cobbling together from memory for some of the pieces, especially like in the 2006 to 2010 or 11 years. I remember Scott coming to me at a pro tour and saying, "So WotC wants to make wants to make EDH product. We're going to have to change the name for intellectual property reasons. What do you think of these choices? Blah 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 blah." And then, that started a conversation that sort of got us into the modern era. But yeah, there's some times when it was me and a bunch of my judge friends playing on tables after the pro tour when there were 25 or 40 people around the world who were playing the format.
That's so crazy.
And now, well, at the first Command Fest happened while I was out there in Seattle. So we went, and the first morning showed up a little early, before the doors open. They let me in. I go find the spot where I'm going to sit, kind of set my stuff up and kind of get ready for the day. And then an hour after the doors open, I'm already playing a game. And I need to stretch my legs, and I stand up and I look around the room at 1,000+ people. And I had a moment. I had an actual moment because there was a time when I always wanted something for the format and thought that it could do a thing, but there was a time where I wouldn't have imagined 1,000 people around the world playing the format.
That's
Now we have 1,000 of them in the same room, and that's a real thing.
It's an exceptional thing that you're a part of, and you should be very proud of it, because it's changed Magic for the better, and that's a good thing to do in life in general, right? To leave something better than it was before you came along.
Yeah, that's what I try to do every day.
Well, you are certainly a beacon for that. So thank you so much again. It's been great talking to you. It's been very enlightening. And,
thanks for having me. Good time.
And you have a good rest of your day.
You do the same. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
That was one of the more informative times I spent with the guests, I would say. I'm serious about building Sheldon's deck. I cannot tell you how many times I have said to my playgroup, "Please, I just want to try this deck out." And they say, "Okay, no problem." And then it's 2 turns later, and they both have managed to sneak out 2 copies of Fiery Emancipation, and I'm waiting for my 3rd land to untap because I'm playing a precon group hug that I swear to God I would like to play one friggin' time before you both pull some Rakdos bullshit and kill each other and me in the process, solely because you want to prove whose dick is longer. But I digress. And more importantly, I humbly bow down to in reverence to Sheldon. He is truly a commander amongst commanders. And as for me, I have some card purchasing to do, which, by the way, you can do through our affiliate link listed below. You get cards, I get a kickback, and rest assured all the proceeds go to stopping power creep and paying the power bills. Bye-bye!